Picture this: a gymnasium in Los Angeles, California. The year is 1967. Late on a Thursday afternoon in October, the light through the high windows cuts across a polished hardwood floor in long amber slabs. 43 people are in that room. Most of them are watching one man. He stands 6 feet 1 inch tall, 207 pounds of documented, competition-tested muscle. His name is Joe Louis, and at this precise moment in American martial arts history, he is the most feared full-contact fighter on the continent. His record speaks in numbers that leave no room for argument. 31 consecutive tournament wins, no losses, no draws. He has been described by Sports Illustrated's Contact within the karate community as possessing the most devastating combination of speed and power in American karate. His left hook alone has ended fights in 0.4 of a second, a number his trainer, John Rhee, had personally clocked with a stopwatch. And right now, Joe Louis is pointing across that gymnasium at a man who weighs 138 pounds. The smaller man does not move. He does not shift his weight. He does not speak. His hands rest loose at his sides, and his eyes, dark, completely still, are tracking something the room cannot see. The air in that gymnasium has gone strange. 42 people who were moving, talking, hitting bags, shuffling feet. They have all stopped. The only sound is the distant traffic on Olympic Boulevard. In 5 seconds, something will happen in this room that Joe Louis will spend the next 50 years trying to explain. This is that story. To understand what happened in that Los Angeles gymnasium on October 12, 1967, you first have to understand who Joe Louis was. Not the name, the fact of him. Joseph Louis was born in Shelby, North Carolina in 1944. By the time he was 19, he had already completed a tour of duty with the United States Marines, earned the rank of sergeant, and deployed to Okinawa, where, between military assignments, he began training in Shorin-ryu karate under a local master named Izo Shimabukuro. He wasn't studying because he was curious. He was studying because he had recognized, with the cold clarity of a man who had been in actual danger, that most fighting systems he had encountered were theater. Shimabukuro's was not. Louis spent 14 months on Okinawa. 14 months of training 6 days a week, 3 hours each session, under a man who had learned his craft from Chota Kakayan, one of the foundational figures of Okinawan karate. What Louis brought back to the United States in 1965 was not a hobby. It was a weapon system refined over 3 generations. He began competing immediately, and the results were not subtle. In his first full year of tournament competition, 1966, Louis won 17 consecutive events. 17. Against opponents who had been training for a decade or more. He did not win on points. He won by making his opponents, many of them experienced, many of them physically imposing, unable to continue. The karate community of the American Southwest took notice. Then the national community took notice. By late 1967, Joe Louis had become the thing that serious martial artists in this country either wanted to beat or did not want to face. His physical specifications were not ambiguous. 6 feet 1 inch, 207 pounds, with a vertical jump of 31 inches and a front kick that had been measured at generating force equivalent to approximately 1,600 pounds per square inch on contact. That number came from a biomechanics study conducted at California State University, Los Angeles in September of 1967, 6 weeks before this story takes place. His trainer, John Rhee, a Korean-born martial artist who would later become one of the most influential figures in American karate, had described Louis's punch velocity as the fastest he had personally witnessed in 20 years of instruction. Not fastest for his size. Fastest. Period. By this point, Louis had also begun private training sessions with a teacher in the Chinatown district of Los Angeles, a Chinese-American martial artist who was beginning to attract attention in film circles and who had developed a personal combat philosophy that was making some instructors deeply uncomfortable. This teacher had told Louis, in their first session, that almost everything Louis had been taught about fighting was based on a foundational error. Louis had laughed. He was not the kind of man who laughed easily, but he had laughed. The teacher's name was Bruce Lee. The gymnasium on this October afternoon belongs to a private karate school whose owner, a former Navy man named Douglas Chun, has allowed Lewis and a rotating group of serious practitioners to use the space on Thursday afternoons. Chen has also, this week, extended that invitation to Bruce Lee, who has expressed interest in observing the training sessions. Several of Lewis's training partners know who Bruce Lee is. They've seen him at various events, seen the way he moves during demonstrations, heard the stories. A few are skeptical. Stories have a way of growing. The air smells of sweat and floor polish, and the faint chemical scent of the canvas mats stacked against the east wall. It is approximately 4:45 in the afternoon. The October light is already beginning to soften. Joe Louis is warming up. And Joe Louis. Here's the critical piece. Joe Louis is in a good mood. He has just come from a meeting in which a film producer expressed genuine interest in using him as a technical consultant on an action picture. His 31st tournament win was 8 days ago. He feels, in his own words from a 1994 interview, like a man who knows exactly what he is capable of. He is relaxed, confident, operating at the center of his own considerable gravity. He does not yet know what is about to change. Bruce Lee arrived at the gymnasium at 4:23 that afternoon, 27 minutes before the confrontation that would reorder everything. He came alone. No training partners, no assistants, no entourage of the kind that a man of his growing reputation might have reasonably assembled. He was wearing a plain dark blue cotton shirt, charcoal slacks, and low black shoes with thin leather soles. The kind of shoes that gave you information about the floor beneath you. He carried a small canvas bag that he set down near the door without drawing attention to the act. His hair was neat. He was not, at first glance, a man who appeared to have come here for anything in particular. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall, 138 pounds on that day, confirmed by a physical examination conducted 3 weeks earlier for an insurance document related to his upcoming film work. If you had walked into that gymnasium not knowing who he was, your eyes would have moved past him. This was, those who knew him said, not accidental. Douglas Chen greeted him near the entrance. They spoke briefly, quietly, and then Bruce Lee found a position near the north wall, partially behind one of the heavy bags, where he could observe the full floor without occupying the center of anyone's attention. He stood with his weight distributed almost exactly equally between both feet, his hands loose, his chin slightly down. He appeared to be watching nothing in particular. He was watching everything. One of the men present that afternoon, a training partner of Lewis's named Gary Taylor, who would later become a certified instructor in his own right, later described what he noticed about Bruce Lee in those first minutes. His knuckles, Taylor said in a 2001 interview. The backs of his hands, even with his hands relaxed, you could see the knuckle structure was different. Not bigger, not swollen, just set, like the bone itself had been reshaped by repetition. Taylor had been training for 9 years. By that point, he recognized what he was looking at. Most of the other men in the room did not. Joe Louis had met Bruce Lee. He knew him. He had trained with him on at least 6 separate occasions. But today, for reasons that will become clear, Louis chose not to acknowledge the smaller man's presence immediately. He was working with 2 of his training partners on a specific kick combination, a rear leg round kick followed by a linear thrust, and he was, as he always was in training, thoroughly absorbed in the technical problem. But here's where it changes. A man named Robert Kwan, a competitive fighter out of the San Fernando Valley, who had not met Bruce Lee before, leaned over to Gary Taylor during a rest interval and asked, quietly, who the Chinese guy near the north wall was. Taylor told him. Kwan looked across the gymnasium for a long moment. Then, with the specific kind of confidence that belongs to men who have not yet been educated, he said something that Taylor would repeat word for word in 3 separate interviews over the following decades. That's the guy everyone keeps talking about. He looks like he'd break. Louis heard it. His face did not change. But he heard it. And Bruce Lee, 22 feet away, heard it too. The challenge did not come from Robert Kwan. That matters. Kwan was bravado, the easy kind, the kind that stays near the walls. The challenge, when it came, emerged from a more complicated place. Joe Louis walked across the gymnasium floor at 4:41 in the afternoon. The training session had paused for water. Louis moved with the particular ease of a very large, very confident man in an environment that has always belonged to him. He stopped in front of Bruce Lee, and the two men looked at each other for a moment. "You've been watching," Lewis said. It was not a question. "I have," Bruce Lee said. "You see anything you want to try?" This is where the account gets precise, because Gary Taylor was standing 11 feet away and was paying close attention. Lewis's tone was not hostile. It wasn't contemptuous. It was the tone of a man extending what he considered to be a generous invitation, the invitation being, "Come onto my floor, in my space, in front of my people, and demonstrate whatever it is you've apparently been telling everyone about." The room shifted. Training had fully stopped now. 38 of the 43 people present had oriented toward the two men, without appearing to do so. The heavy bags hung still. The only sound was the soft mechanical hum of the ventilation system in the ceiling. Bruce Lee did not answer immediately. He looked at Lewis the way you look at something you are measuring. Not the man's size, not his musculature, but the specific geometry of how he occupied space. Bruce Lee's eyes, according to Taylor, moved to Lewis's shoulders, then his hips, then back to his face. The entire assessment took perhaps 2 seconds. "I noticed you drop your left shoulder before the rear kick," Bruce Lee said. "About 4 inches, about a third of a second before the initiation." Lewis blinked. One of his training partners, a man named Carl, who had been working with Lewis for 2 years, later said this was the only time in 4 years he had seen Lewis blink in response to something someone said to him. "That's not possible," Lewis said. "I've had 2 coaches watch that combination for 6 months." "I know," Bruce Lee said. "You want me to show you?" Now the room was completely still. Not the stillness of held breath, the deeper stillness that comes when everyone present understands that the nature of the conversation has changed. Robert Kwan, near the east wall, had stopped moving entirely. Douglas Chun, the gymnasium's owner, took a step forward from his position near the entrance. He was going to intervene, to suggest, diplomatically, that maybe this wasn't the direction the afternoon needed to go. He had a liability to think about. He had relationships to think about. He had the specific social physics of a room full of serious, competitive men to think about. But Lewis held up one hand, just slightly, and Chun stopped. Lewis looked at Bruce Lee. "All right," he said. "Show me." That's when the crowd went silent. Not silent from noise. They had been quiet for 20 seconds already. Silent in the way that the space between 2 notes is silent. The training floor of that gymnasium, on the afternoon of October 12th, 1967, became a place where something was about to be demonstrated that had no established category. Lewis moved into his fighting stance. 207 pounds of documented capability, positioned with the precision of a man who had spent years constructing the optimal expression of his physical potential. Bruce Lee did not move into a stance. He simply turned, very slightly, so that his right side faced Lewis. His hands remained at his sides. He looked, to everyone watching, like a man who had paused while walking through a hallway. "Come," Bruce Lee said quietly. "Throw the combination." Lewis did not move immediately. Later he would say, in 1994, in 2003, and again in 2009, in 3 separate documented interviews, that in that moment, for reasons he could not name, he was reluctant, not afraid, not hesitant, reluctant, like a part of his experience recognized something his conscious mind had not yet caught up to. He threw the rear leg round kick, and then everything happened in 5 seconds. In the first second, Joe Lewis launched the rear leg round kick, a technique he had thrown, by his own conservative estimate, approximately 40,000 times over the preceding 4 years. His right hip rotated at the initiation, generating torque through the kinetic chain in exactly the sequence his training had optimized. Gluteus, hip flexor, oblique, the long pivot of the tibia. The kick was traveling toward Bruce Lee's left ribcage at a speed his trainer had clocked on multiple occasions at just under 9 meters per second. In that first second, Bruce Lee moved. Not backward, not to the side. He moved forward and to his right. A single step, compact, perhaps 18 inches of displacement. That placed him not where the kick was going but precisely behind the arc of it. The Wing Chun principle of centerline theory states that the most direct line between 2 fighters is the one that must be controlled. Bruce Lee did not move away from Lewis's centerline. He moved to claim it. In the second, Lewis's kick completed its arc through empty air. His momentum, the committed transfer of 207 pounds of mass through a fully extended rotational movement, was already in motion, irreversible, carrying his weight forward and left in the natural follow-through of the technique. This is the mechanical reality of any committed strike. In the moment of extension, the striker is briefly committed to the direction of the force. This is not a flaw in Lewis's technique. It is a law of physics. What changed was that Bruce Lee now understood it, in real time, in a way that Lewis's coaches had not. Bruce Lee's left hand came up. Not fast. That is the word that Gary Taylor used repeatedly in his account. Not fast. Precise. The movement originated from his elbow, not his shoulder. A Wing Chun structural principle that dramatically reduces telegraphing. His palm made contact with Lewis's extended knee. Not pushing it, not blocking it, but redirecting the existing momentum of the technique by approximately 12 degrees. 12 degrees of redirection on a technique generating Lewis's force per square inch at full extension is not 12 degrees of effect. The physics compound. Lewis's balance, already committed forward, shifted sideways in a way that his kinetic system had not been prepared to accommodate. In the third second, the crowd went completely still. Not because Lewis fell. He did not fall. He is Joe Louis. He has the reflexive athletic architecture of a man whose body has been trained to solve balance problems faster than conscious thought can register. What happened was something that several witnesses described identically in later accounts. Lewis lurched. 1 foot, the planted left, shifted outward 4 or 5 inches in a rapid correction. His arms came up and out, the involuntary movement of a man recalibrating his center of gravity. He did not go down, but for 3/4 of a second, Joe Louis, 31 consecutive tournament wins, 1,600 pounds per square inch of documented striking force, the most feared full-contact competitor in American karate, was not in control of his own body. Then Bruce Lee did the second thing. He didn't fight the way other Wing Chun fighters fought. He didn't stand rooted in a classical guard, didn't chamber his strikes with the formalized precision of a system designed for the specific geometry of straight-line attacks. What he did in the 4th second is what made this moment something that 43 witnesses would argue about for decades. He stepped forward, back to his left, closing the space between himself and Lewis in a single movement, and his right hand came up from below in a vertical strike, a Chiso or splitting fist technique derived from Wing Chun's centerline principles, aimed precisely at the point just below Lewis's sternum where the diaphragm sits. He did not complete the strike. His fist stopped. His knuckles, those reshaped, structurally altered knuckles that Gary Taylor had noticed, stopped approximately 4 centimeters from Lewis's solar plexus. His arm was fully extended. His elbow was locked. His weight was behind the movement. The strike had not landed. But every person in that gymnasium who understood anything about physics and anatomy understood what would have happened if it had. In the 5th second, Bruce Lee stepped back. Not away. Back. A single step that returned him to his original position. Hands at his sides, weight balanced. As if he had simply stood there and watched Lewis demonstrate the kick combination he'd been working on. Lewis straightened. His breathing, for the first time that Taylor could remember in 2 years of watching him train, was audible from 11 feet away. A single controlled exhale. His hands came down slowly. He looked at Bruce Lee. He looked at the space between them. He looked at his own planted foot, which had shifted involuntarily, and which was now 3 inches further from its original position than it had been 20 seconds ago. The gymnasium was silent for 4 seconds. Real silence, not performance, not theater, but the organic silence of people processing something they do not have immediate language for. That's not Bruce Lee winning a fight. That's not a smaller man defeating a larger one through superior athleticism or fortunate circumstance. That's the demonstration of a principle that the kinetic architecture of any committed movement contains, within itself, the precise information needed to redirect it. Economy of motion. Not less movement, the right movement. The movement that uses the antagonist's own force as its primary tool. In 4 seconds and 1 arrested strike, Bruce Lee had shown 43 people something that 2 coaches and 6 months of dedicated drilling had not revealed. The shoulder drop was real. Lewis dropped it 4 inches before every rear kick. Not occasionally, always. as reliably as gravity. It had been built into his technique so deeply that conscious monitoring could not detect it. Bruce Lee had seen it in the first 7 minutes of observation, from 22 feet away. Through casual watching, Lewis stood on his own floor, in his own space, in front of his own people, and breathed. Douglas Chin quietly asked the other men in the gymnasium to take a break. Within 4 minutes, the training floor was empty except for 2 people. Joe Louis sat on a bench near the north wall, the same wall Bruce Lee had been standing against 40 minutes earlier. Bruce Lee sat across from him on an equipment case, elbows on his knees, hands loose. The afternoon light through the high windows had shifted. It was softer now, less amber than gold, and it came in at an angle that made the empty gymnasium feel larger than it was. Lewis spoke first. The shoulder. The shoulder, Bruce Lee confirmed. I didn't know. You couldn't know. You'd been told to watch for it, and told you weren't doing it. Both things were true. The problem is that after a certain number of repetitions, the body stops asking permission. Bruce Lee paused. The technique became you. That's not a failure. That's what training is supposed to do. The failure is in thinking that what became you is finished. Lewis looked at his hands for a moment. He had hands that had been described, by more than one opponent, as instruments. He turned them over, back up, and said, "What you did with the redirect, that wasn't blocking. No, you used my weight. I used your commitment," Bruce Lee said. "There's a difference. Your weight is yours. Your commitment is information. Once you commit to a technique, you've told me everything I need to know about where you'll be in the next half second." He paused again. Most fighters read that information after the fact. They block what's already arriving. I was reading what was coming. Lewis was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had a quality that Taylor, who was not in the room but who Lewis would describe this conversation to, in detail, 2 days later, said Lewis never used when discussing technique. It was the voice of a man asking a genuine question. How long did it take you to learn to read that fast? Bruce Lee considered the question with visible seriousness, the way a man considers something he has not been asked in exactly that form before. "I didn't learn to read faster," he finally said. "I learned to have less to think about." Lewis looked up. "Every principle you carry into a confrontation that isn't necessary," Bruce Lee said, "costs you time. Not much time, but time. The closer you get to fighting with only what is essential, the more of your attention is available for what's actually happening. Most people are using 70% of their awareness to maintain their system. I'm trying to get to where there's no system to maintain." That line landed in Lewis's understanding somewhere specific. He could feel it land, the way you feel something click into alignment. He had been training for 4 years on the operating assumption that the goal was refinement, taking a complete system and making it more precise, more powerful, more technically perfect. The idea that the system itself might be the problem, that the goal might be reduction rather than addition, was not a thought his training had given him tools to approach. He sat with it for a moment. "What you did with your hand," Lewis said. "When you stopped." "Yes, you could have." "Yes," Bruce Lee said. No qualification, no false modesty, a simple acknowledgement of what had been true. "Why didn't you?" "Because I'd already said what I wanted to say." 38 witnesses, 5 seconds, one lesson that was still being taught 50 years later. Joe Louis stood up from the bench. He extended his right hand. Bruce Lee stood and took it, a handshake, firm, brief, the specific handshake of 2 people who have settled something between them without needing to name what it was. "Next Thursday," Louis said. "Next Thursday," Bruce Lee agreed. As Louis walked toward the equipment room, he stopped once and turned back. "The shoulder drop," he said. "It's in my left jab too, isn't it?" Bruce Lee looked at him. "Yes." Louis nodded once, a single, clean nod, and continued walking. He already knew what he had to do. Years later, specifically in the spring of 1983, Joe Louis opened his first dedicated martial arts training facility in Washington, D.C. On the wall behind the front desk, in black letters on white paint, he had a single line from those Thursday afternoon sessions installed as a permanent fixture. It read, "What you carry that isn't necessary costs you something." His students assumed it was a Lewis original. He did not correct them. He understood by then that the geography of an idea matters less than its arrival. Lewis went on to become, by most accounts, one of the most important figures in the development of full-contact American karate, the bridge between the controlled contact tournament circuit of the 1960s and the full-contact kickboxing movement of the 1970s. His fight record extended to 54 documented competitive victories. He trained fighters who themselves became champions. He wrote, instructed, consulted on film productions, and spent the last decades of his career as one of the most thoughtful voices in American martial arts on the relationship between competitive technique and underlying philosophy. But the people who trained under Lewis longest, the ones who came to him in his later years, when he had moved away from competition and toward teaching, describe a specific quality in his instruction that they struggled to categorize. He was not interested in adding. He was interested in subtracting. He would watch a student perform a technique, say nothing for a long moment, and then ask, what would happen if you took that away? Not the technique, the assumption underneath it. A student of Lewis's named Marcus Webb, who trained with him from 1987 to 1996, described it this way in a 2014 interview. He would tell us that every extra thing you carry into a confrontation is a wall between you and what's actually happening. He said a teacher showed him that once, a long time ago, with one motion. He said it took him 6 months to understand what he saw, and 6 more years to understand why it mattered. The teacher Lewis had in mind never claimed credit for that lesson. He was busy with other things, films, a school of his own, a philosophy of movement he was still building in real time, a framework he was calling Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, not a style but an anti-style, a system whose central principle was the elimination of systems. His own version of the lesson he demonstrated in that gymnasium. Be water. Take the shape of the container. Have no form, so that you can become any form. Return now to that afternoon in October of 1967. That gymnasium on Olympic Boulevard. The amber light. The 43 witnesses. The 5 seconds that looked, from the outside, like almost nothing. A man who could not be easily hurt asking a man, who had never been afraid, to show him what he didn't know. A lesson delivered without words, accepted without argument, carried forward for 50 years through the hands and voices of students who learned it without knowing where it came from. One movement, one moment, one echo that is still moving. But there is something about Bruce Lee's time in Los Angeles, something about what he was building in those private sessions, those Thursday afternoons, those conversations that ended with handshakes and single nods, that has never been fully told. The sessions continued after October 1967. What was discussed in them, and what was demonstrated, went further than anything Lewis ever spoke about publicly. There was one session, just one, that Lewis refused to describe, in any of his 3 decades of interviews, in any detail at all. He was asked about it directly, once, in 2007. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Some things you don't put words to. You just carry them." What happened in that session, and why Joe Louis, a man who was afraid of almost nothing, chose silence when it came to that afternoon. That's a story for another time.